Hi, everyone. My name is Kanya Balakrishna. I'm Yale class of 2009, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Future Project, a national nonprofit organization dedicated to training young people everywhere to use their passion and purpose to change the world. As part of the 150th anniversary of Women at Yale, I am so excited to speak with Barbara Bush, Yale class of 2004, about youth leadership today. Barbara is the co-founder and board chair of Global Health Corps, an organization that mobilizes a global community of young leaders to build the movement for health equity. Since 2009, Global Health Corps has supported over 1,000 young leaders to support the world's most pressing global health issues. Welcome, Barbara.
Thanks, Kanya. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. So Barbara, we share a belief that young people have extraordinary power to shape the world around them, to build a better future for all of us. Where did that belief come from for you? When did you first realize your power to lead and make change?
Great question. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone for joining us. I first had that belief when I was young myself. I'm afraid I'm not quite so young anymore. It was actually when I was at Yale, and I really started to see the power of young people because of my interest in global health. When I was a student at Yale, I assumed that I was going to be an architect. That's what I'd always loved. And that's what I'd always been interested in growing up. And I was lucky my junior year of college, I was lucky that summer to travel with my parents. And this is incredibly cliche to say that travel changed my life, but it did. At that time, it was in 2003, and we were traveling to East and Southern Africa for the launch of PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And at the time, if you were living on the continent of Africa, you could not have access to the life-saving medicine that you needed if you were HIV positive, which we had in the United States, which any of us in the United States could have walked to our local CVS and gotten antiretroviral drugs. And we would have had a chronic illness that we could have lived with for the rest of our days. But if you lived on the continent of Africa, you simply could not get access to these drugs. And that was because pharmaceutical companies didn't distribute them there. And so the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief provides free drugs for people living with HIV in developing countries around the world. And at the time, it was estimated that 15 million Africans would die in the next 10 years. These stark numbers and images that are mind-blowing that existed in the 2000s. And when I was there for the launch of this program, it's very cliche. I was very young. I was very idealistic. I was just completely shocked to see hundreds of people waiting in the street for drugs that scientists and doctors and researchers had spent their time to create these incredible tools. But if you were poor, you didn't get access to them. And so I became obsessed with global health. Quick side note, flash forward, now 12 million people are alive because of this incredible policy that all Americans are responsible for. I came back to Yale. I dropped my architecture major and I studied as many global health classes as existed at the time. And the reason that I, through that, became interested in the power of young people is I ended up meeting with all of these incredible leaders in the field of global health. And one of them, a man named Peter Piot, was running UNAIDS at the time. And he, like many of the titans in global health, had gotten their interest because of the AIDS crisis. They were doctors, they were nurses, they were family members of people with AIDS in the 80s, when there was tremendous amount of fear, when no one knew how it was spread or how it was contracted. And they would show up every day combating that fear to serve people, whether they were doctors or whether they were family members serving their family members. And because of that, they all got interested in global health. And as time happens, they ended up leading all the major institutions in global health, and which is incredible. And, we have so much to thank all of them for. But I ended up having this conversation with Peter, and his big concern was that this meant that so many of the leaders were going to retire at the same time. And he was about to retire from UNAIDS, and he was really worried about who was going to take up this cause. And especially because our generation was lucky not to live in this type of fear. I mean, we have a different fear around COVID, and we'll see if this does increase the number of young people interested in health. But we were lucky to not have that fear. And so his big concern was that as all these titans retire, and as we've made so much progress in global health, will young people think we've made enough progress and not engage? And then in health, you can quickly slide backwards in health outcomes.
Right.
And so he gave me this call to call to arms, essentially, of like, how are you going to engage your generation to fight global health? Mm-hmm. And what was amazing about that is our generation was already engaged. More young people want to work on social change than ever before. And so we started Global Health Course specifically around this call to tap into the tremendous interest that young people have in affecting change and in living lives of purpose. And while Global Health Course specifically focused on, obviously, global health outcomes and solving global health issues, we see so many organizations like yours and like Teach for America and Teach for All that are really tapping into this younger potential. And we've seen so quickly through Global Health Corps, we've now had, as you mentioned before, we've worked with over 1,000 young leaders from around the world. We accept 1% of the applicants that apply to Global Health Corps. And it's not, we wish we weren't quite as competitive. The reason we are is because there's so much interest. And what's been incredible is giving opportunities to young people through the Global Health Corps program, where they work in global health every day for a year, and they go through our curriculum throughout the year focused on entrepreneurship, advocacy, policy change, so they have the skills they need to make a bigger impact in global health. And then they have this tight network of sort of comrades in the field of global health that they work with through the thousands of their peers. And what we've seen that's incredible is, even though our crew is young, they're leaders. And we saw this, the more exposure that they've been given to global health issues and mentorship and seeing real change in the gray area that exists every day when you're working in complex health systems, we've seen them step up. And so, for instance, when the Ebola crisis happened, we saw our alumni community mobilize, and about 50 of them moved to Liberia and Sierra Leone to address the Ebola crisis. And they didn't just move there. They opened the Partners in Health office there. They worked for the Ministry of Health. They were the executive directors of a number of organizations. And, they were 35 and under, but because they'd been given such intense exposure, and because they believed they were leaders, which you often don't believe when you're young, they stepped up, and they knew that if they weren't going to do this, who else was?
That's beautiful. It must make you so proud to see the alumni, stepping up in a time of need. I'm curious, you said a couple of times that, our generation and studies, I think research is showing that the generation coming up now is even more purposeful and more committed, than ever to making change and leading change in their world. Why do you think that is? What are the factors, in society as we were growing up that influenced, our sense of responsibility or obligation or purpose or passion, for making change in the world?
I mean, that's a great question. I do believe that when you're little, you really can believe you can change the world. Like, I definitely like that. Like, I remember starting a recycling program in second grade for my school. I mean, I remember really thinking that this is something we're all capable of doing. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes as you move through life, you become more cynical, or you see different obstacles that seem impossible to overcome. That's on all of us to make sure we don't continue to do that as we grow older and have more experiences. But I think in many ways, young people haven't experienced that as much. And so they can maintain this incredible optimism that is often fueled by anger or fueled by seeing injustices that each of us want to address. And I think a big thing that's different, and I'm afraid that I'm probably a generation older than you, Kanya, but I think connectivity has had a huge impact. And I know we talk a lot about, how the internet is a huge change. It is, obviously, and we talk about social networks. But I think what's even more inspiring is when now you live in a global world. You are a global citizen because the media that you're consuming, the tools that you're using, the other young people that you can interact with so easily now via your phone prove that you are living in a global world. And I felt like I was a global citizen when I was at Yale in 2004 as well. But I think now, with the proliferation of such simple and easy ways to connect, it seems even bigger. And I think the reason that matters is, we see like with Greta Thunberg and the climate march last year. I mean, 6 million people, young people marched. And that's organized by a high schooler, and it's high schoolers marching. And it does really make me think, what are each of these young people going to do as they get older, as they've seen the strength of numbers of their peers who also care, which is so mutually reinforcing.
Yeah, that's I think a very powerful actually call to action for the adults in society, to find ways to inspire and support young people to, like you said, believe they can lead and believe they can make change. So I'm just curious, what do you think is our obligation as a society to young people, especially to young people of color, to young women, to young people who are living at the margins of society? What's our obligation to them so that they can be ready to lead in the future and today?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great question, and I want to hear your answer to this too. Each of us easily can play a role. I think a huge thing, maybe this sounds cliche and maybe this sounds small, but I think it's really important to let people that you interact with know that they're enough. And I think it's really important to do that with young people that you interact with. When we at Global Health Core Training, when we say who here thinks they're a leader, very few people raise their hand at the beginning of the year, because when you're young, you feel like you're not a leader because you haven't had a wealth of experiences. And I think that that's something that each of us in our day-to-day life can do, is make sure that the young people we're around believe that they're enough. I think it's incredibly important for each of us to look at our own networks and see what they look like. With Global Health Core, actually 75% of our fellows are women. So I believe 70% are people of color. And that is intentional, because if you look at the field of global health, the leaders are traditionally male, white, and Western. Yeah. And that's great, and I don't want to criticize that, because we've made tremendous strides in global health. But in many ways, we feel like it's our responsibility, if we're seeding the field with talent, to make sure that we're seeding the field with talent that has not always been represented at the table in making decisions in global health, particularly if we're making decisions about women's health, or health, social determinants of health that disproportionately impact minority communities. And I think really now is a moment in the United States where each of us are thinking about our own power and our own privilege, and we need to do the same about thinking about our networks. And if our networks aren't diverse, particularly in the young people that we're mentoring or working alongside, to do something about that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And, I think on the Future Project side, we work with high school age students. I think for exactly the reason you just said, is that, young people, they have in them, I think that inherent belief that they can make change, but they almost don't always believe themselves, And so what we hope to be able to do is to give them experiences, opportunities to almost practice, making change and leading and exploring the things that they really care about. Because a lot of the Future Project's belief comes from the idea that if you find the thing that lights you up, like you did, when you went on that trip, if you find the thing that moves you, that angers you or excites you, and that you're really good at, that you feel in your element around, then, your whole life can be a life of contribution, no matter what path you take. So that's our hope with the Future Project. And hopefully we're helping to create a pipeline for Global Health Core and, other organizations like yours.
Absolutely. I love that. So important.
Well, I'm curious, we are living obviously in a very challenging moment in our country and in the entire world. And, I imagine there's a lot of young people out there, young people as young as high school age, but also, in their 20s and their 30s who are looking around and wondering, what their role is right now. They might be feeling hopeful. They might be feeling, hopeless. And they might be wondering how the world needs them to step up right now. And so I'm curious, what do you want to say to them? What do you want them to know? What do you hope they'll do right now in this really critical moment?
I love that question. And so much of it, I think, speaks to what you were just saying. Right now, there's a million things to be angry about. There's also a million things to be hopeful for. And this is so cheesy, but I can't help it. There's that incredible Mr. Rogers quote about when he said to his mom, I think when he was young, about disasters and feeling hopeless about them. And essentially she said, always look for the helpers. And I think that right now is an incredible time to think about that, whether it's COVID or whether it's looking to people marching in the streets for the movement for Black lives. And what's ironic is right now we actually do need young people more than ever because of COVID. We need young people because they're not in compromised health. They're not in groups that are considered compromised. Right. And so, I was thinking about this 2 weeks ago was National Poll Worker Day. And we have a shortage of poll workers in the United States. And we actually need young people to be poll workers to make sure that our democracy will run smoothly. And we need them because they have great health. And to your point before, I think that now is an incredible moment where people feel intense emotions. And if we can channel those emotions, particularly young people's emotions, away from cynicism and away from helplessness, and I think you combat cynicism by being able to take action, then I can't think of how many young people will have their thing that lights them up or that makes them so mad they want to do something about that. And we could easily see that in racial justice right now. We already see that so many of the young leaders in the movement for Black lives, so many of the leaders in the movement for Black lives are young. With COVID, we need young people to be serving their elderly neighbors. We need them to be volunteering right now. And to your point before, these are opportunities that let young people practice what it is to be a leader and practice what lights them up and practice stepping up. And I do believe, there's that Malcolm Gladwell book about doing 10,000 hours. You get exceptional something. And I think, we think of that with like Bill Gates had 10,000 hours of coding, but we can also have 10,000 hours of serving other people and 10,000 hours of collaborating and working on teams and 10,000 hours of problem solving or whatever it might be that's so important to changing the world. And young people have a chance to start practicing for their 10,000 hours or gaining their 10,000 hours now.
I think that is a beautiful way of thinking about it. And, I hope that, we as a society can sort of fulfill our obligation to the future by ensuring that young people have those chances to practice and to get their 10,000 hours as they grow up, because the vision, I think, of the world, a vision of a world in which, every person feels empowered, to make change, even in a small scale, is a pretty exciting one. So I'm just curious, as we wrap up here, what you want to say to the rest of society, to the adults, to the schools, to the organizations, to the people who are responsible for making sure that young people grow up, with everything that they need. What do you want all of us to hear from you and to do as we move forward?
Mm-hmm. It's pretty simple. I think we need to make sure we give young people a chance to lead. And that looks like letting young people take on more responsibility, take on things that they don't even believe that they can do so that they can learn that they can do them. And that's something that we can all do, is making sure that we cultivate their voices and give them opportunities to step up, especially in a time when we definitely need more young people to step up.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Barbara, for a fantastic discussion. It was so much fun to hear how you came to your belief, and congratulations on everything that you and the Global Health Core team have done in the last 10 years.
Thank you. Thanks, Kanya. I'm so excited to have chatted with you, and I've long loved the work of the Future Project. So
thank you.
With you. Thanks to everyone for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you.